Welcome to Global One Media's Stocks to Watch. I'm Michael Suido. I'm speaking today with David Williams. He's the executive chairman of Mount Isa Minerals. They're an Australian mining company that's focused on copper exploration in the northwest of Queensland. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. Looking forward to having a chat with you.
David, you've worked in commodities, energy, resources for most of your career, and you're definitely familiar with minerals exploration in Queensland, which is where Mount Isa Minerals project is located. But until you joined the company a few months ago, you had not focused on copper specifically. So tell us, what attracted you to the company?
Yeah, Michael, it's an interesting story, that. And I suppose people said the same to me with Thompson Resources when I took it down a silver pathway. What got you into silver? And look, really, it's about this whole issue of critical minerals, critical metals, the movement to net zero by 2050. And copper is a misunderstood metal or mineral. Yeah, we take it for granted. But it's what will drive the whole move to net zero. We need a lot of it, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit later on. But this company, therefore, its focus was on copper. Its location, it's right next door to the Mount Isa mine that Glencore owns, and that's been operating for 90 to 100 years. It had an extensive exploration database. It had some fresh thinking. It had proof of concept. It had evidence on the surface, rock chips up to 34%. So it ticked a lot of boxes for me in the sense of this wasn't absolute greenfields. Fantastic address, evidence of it, good geology behind it, drill ready, set to go.
Really interesting. Interesting to hear what attracted you to it. And it does sound very attractive. And you mentioned about copper and net zero. So let's dive a bit more into copper right now. It's used in generators, motors, wiring, basically anything electrical, not to mention roofing, plumbing, industrial machinery. And it's a key component of electric vehicles. So for some time now, we'll get more into the EVs in a bit. For some time, copper has been seen as a bellwether for the global economy. When copper prices surge, it's seen as a sign of an economic upswing. When their prices fall, it indicates that a recession could be coming. I'm wondering if you think whether this is still the case today, because copper is actually trading about 20% lower than it was a year and a half ago.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, look, it is at the moment. And I think it's very interesting to come back to how it's trading at the moment with that whole pressure that will come from the move to 2050 net zero. We think about it, energy is our life, using energy is our life. What's an important component of energy is copper. The stronger the economy, the more businesses are moving, the more we're prepared to spend on items, the more energy required, the more copper required. So and given the quantities of it, it's not surprising, therefore, that it has been that good indicator of the economy. And I think that's where you've seen in 2023, copper hasn't been at the prices everyone was expecting. It has been depressed. But then the market, the economies around the global economies have actually not been strong. We're starting to see an improvement in the copper prices. And frankly, I think we're starting to see an improvement in the sentiment of the global economy and the market. So 2024, I think, will be quite different. But I think the other element that you just touched on, which is going to change it, is the whole move, the whole push to net zero by 2050.
So let's talk demand. S&P Global thinks that demand for refined copper will nearly double within the next 10 to 11 years. Where do you think this demand is coming from?
You touched on the amount of copper in electric vehicles and in the other one that's often referred to as solar panels. I use a slightly different analogy to illustrate the issue we've got. You've got a wind farm, and it's a series of windmills, all have to be connected to transport the electricity. You've got a solar farm. You've got a whole series of solar panels, all having to be connected to transport the electricity. You've got these wind farms and you've got these solar farms, not in the locations of traditional base load generation. How do you transport the electricity produced by these farms to where it's required? You need wires to transmit it. all of that interconnection and that transmission is copper. So a lot of the large quantity of that's driving the demand for copper as we go forward will actually be in those ancillary sides of it, even apart from the fact that you're actually going to have quite a large amount of copper in wind turbines, in electric vehicles. And I think that's the thing that gets forgotten. You know, we all, I think generally everyone has just taken copper for granted. It's always been there. You know, we've been mining it in Australia for, you know, over 100 years. And therefore people haven't really focused on it. But I think they're beginning to focus on it now. And a conservative illustration of that was, you know, we've mined approximately 700 million tonnes of copper from this planet since we've been on it. We need another 1.4 billion tonnes in order to achieve the net zero in 2050. I mean, those numbers are staggering. And I can tell you, the easy copper's been found and it's been mined. So yes, there'll be copper there, but it's going to be much harder to find.
You mentioned solar power, wind energy. China is rapidly scaling up its solar energy capacity. Goldman Sachs expects the PRC will install around 150 gigawatts of copper-intensive solar energy capacity this year, which is almost twice as much as the year before. And we didn't even talk about hydropower. Even that requires lots of copper for the storage and for moving the water from one place to another, apparently, for powering that. And we talked about electric vehicles. And one thing, though, which I wanted to share with you is a possible counterpoint, is I read that while copper is really really necessary for EVs, Tesla and others are finding ways to limit the amount of copper that's needed. They're using thinner copper foil, more compact batteries, higher voltage systems, and these innovations might dampen the demand. Are you concerned about this at all?
No, again, not. Yeah, we're talking about the specific vehicles and so on there. And yeah, it's a small quantity. Yeah, it's kilos, but those vehicles have to be charged. You have to have charging stations along the road so the vehicles can be recharged and continue on their journey. How do you connect and transport the electricity to those charging stations? Copper wires. So again, I keep stepping back from the micro that a lot of people focus on. Yeah, it's important for the driving and for the demand, but the big demand driver is going to be this interconnection and transportation of the energy, of the electricity.
You've made a strong case for the demand side of the equation. What about supply? Is there enough supply currently to keep up with demand?
No, and look, I think that's what's becoming important and starting to be appreciated. You know, as I said, a lot of copper has been mined already, and that was the easy stuff. They were large quantities, high grade, near the surface, but they're starting to disappear. They're starting to get towards the end of mine life. You know, we're seeing Chile as one of the world's largest producers of copper. Its production is declining 10% per annum. A good example next door to us, which I consider it a positive, and we can talk about that a bit later on, is Glencore announcing the scaling back of the Mount Isa mine right next door to where our tenements are. Scaling back because it's running out of copper resources. It needs further resources, and that mine was Australia's second largest copper producer. So you're starting to see those big mines that have been providing the copper over the decades getting towards the end of their mine life. Where's it coming from? And you know, it's not surprising when you look at the large companies, and large companies are starting to talk about the need for copper and lift the profile of copper. Back in September, US Department of Energy actually added copper to critical minerals list in the USA, and that's not a long list as a critical mineral as well. So we're starting to see that lifting, but of course, I think coming back to the point I made before, that the general community or the general investment community has considered it's almost like iron ore. You know, there's a lot of it there. It's been there forever. There's big mines. We don't need to worry about that. We need to chase lithium or rare earths or some of the other exotic minerals. And yeah, they're all important. But if you don't have that bulk mineral that's going to drive this net zero, you can't do anything with them.
It's really interesting to know you talk about the supply there and about how Glencore was going offline. One of the world's largest copper mines, a project in Panama, is being shuttered. That follows a landmark court ruling just this week. So there's definitely scope for new mines to come in and to bring, well, for existing mines to increase their output and for new players to come into the market, which I think brings us to Mount Isa's project. Tell us, what's the current status?
Well, so the current status is we're working forward to complete the IPO. Our target is in the new year and the first quarter of next year. We're ready to go. We've done a lot of, there's 250,000 soil and rock chip samples. I mentioned before, rock chips up to 34% copper. So we know it's there. You can see it on the surface. You can see the pegmatites that are driving it through to the surface. Massive database of geophysical data, which has helped us take a rethink as to the geology and take a mineral systems approach and realise that it's a different system where we are, which is on the western side of the Mount Isa fault. It's a true IOCG style of deposit there, as opposed to the Mount Isa deposit, which is on the eastern side, is more of a sedimentary hosted deposit. Same source. And we know the quantity of copper that has come out of Mount Isa. So we're sitting there with the same source. We did some drilling in 2022, a proof of concept program. It's picked up the mineralisation and some of the geology we were expecting. So the concept, that mineral systems review that we did, or the approach we've taken, verified by the drilling. And so we're now ready to go. We're just waiting. As soon as the company is listed and got the IPO funds in, the drill rigs will be on. We've got 13 walk-up targets already identified. The approvals are in place. Even a lot of the pads and the access roads are in place. The agreements with the landholders and the local First Nations people are in place. So we're set to go. And it didn't surprise us with the Glencore announcement. It wasn't as everyone thought about shutting Mount Isa mine. It's actually about scaling it back operations because they don't have sufficient resources. The beauty about our project being next door, and I stand on our eastern boundary and I'm looking up at the massive waste rock dump at the Mount Isa mine, that we are literally that close, is we don't have to get approvals for processing or the like. Yes, we'll have to get approvals once we've estimated a resource to dig it up, but we'll just then transport it or sell it to next door. And this is part of the problem in looking going forward, which a lot of commentators are picking up on. S&P Global recently said the timeline from essentially discovery through to first output has moved out to about 15.7 years. So you think about some of these projects that we're seeing where they're starting on the identification and the drilling, they've still got another 15, 16, 17 years before they'll be producing, because they'll have to go through those approval processes to be able to process what they dig up. Now, they can transport it down, the 100, 200 kilometres away, but you'll need a larger resource and a higher grade to be able to withstand those transportation costs. Mount Isa Minerals, our tenements are next door, literally to the processing plant, about 2 kilometres. We drive through their haul road just to get to the start of our tenements. That's a tremendous advantage, and a tremendous advantage not just in the timing, but actually in the quantity of resource we'll need to define at an early stage.
So you mentioned that your company is likely going public. We often wrap up these interviews with a message to potential a message to potential investors, a elevator pitch, if you will. And while Mount Isa isn't publicly traded yet, it likely will be in the year ahead. So if it does go public, why do you think viewers should invest in the company?
Right. So our target is Q1 next year, and we're well advanced. So watch this space in the new year, and watch for that prospectus to be launched. Why would you invest in this company? It's copper. and its focus is copper. We're not adding in other minerals. So it's an opportunity for an investment in a copper play. Its location. I often say to people, I sound like a real estate agent. It's location, location, location. We are next door to a mine and a processing operation that you'll probably not see the likes of again in Australia. So we've got an excellent route there. We've got proof of concept, we've got surface with those rock chips, we've got drill program ready to go. On listing, bang, we'll have those drill rigs out there drilling. We've got historical core ready to go for multi-element assays. It'll be a good news story. We're focused on, in the next 3 years, producing a copper mineral resource estimate and being ready then to get that commercialized as quickly as possible.
I love that comparison that you have for your company for Mount Isa Minerals with property, location, location, location. You guys have it. It's been really great to explore the ins and outs of copper with you. I'm going to leave it for others to decide whether copper prices are still a bellwether for the global economy. However, from speaking with you, it seems one thing is for certain: copper is definitely playing a crucial role in the transition to green economies. David, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for your time, Michael. A pleasure talking to you.
We've been speaking with Mount Isa Minerals Executive Chairman David Williams, and you've been watching Global One Media's Stocks to Watch. I'm Michael Suido.